thank you all so much for coming. We have a great night planned for you. We're going to have some youth poetry. We're going to have some games. Of course, this is a game night, and we're going to have some great presentations from some great organizations. So yeah, first things first, I'm going to hand it over to Charlotte, who is going to be reading some youth poetry for us.
Okay, hello everyone. This first poem is titled Ruination, and it's by Amanda Roca. She's in 12th grade and from Valley Catholic High School. So, the climate is going to pieces. We're losing most all of our species, while we're sweltering here in our parched atmosphere, wishing we'd listen to Greta's speeches. One more time, the climate is going to pieces. We're losing most all of our species, while we're sweltering here in our parched atmosphere, wishing we listened to Greta's speeches. And this second one is titled Earth's Fate by Blake England in 7th grade from Flex Online Middle School. Global warming is destroying, Earth is warming, this is real, not fake. We need to hurry and fix our mistakes. Hurry, 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 because Earth's fate is quickly uncoiling. One more time, global warming is destroying, Earth is warming, this is real, not fake. We need to hurry and fix our mistakes. Hurry, 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 because Earth's fate is quickly uncoiling. And I'll hand it back to Valerie.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you for those that reading. Those poems are great. So next, I'm gonna move things on to our first game. This game is titled Memory Mania, and this is a classic memory game, but the game is best experienced in a Chrome browser. So if you have that option, please use it. So here's how you play. You flip the cards 2 at a time until you reveal a match. And when you've matched all of the pairs, then a button titled 4C will appear on the top right side of your screen. And when you press that button, you'll get an alternate set of cards. So we're going to share the link to that game in the chat. And then you guys will have the option to play that game on your own, or you can watch as we stream the gameplay.
And for those of you who don't know, our famous game streaming celebrity, Ian Duncanson, he's with the Beaverton Public Library. And as a reminder for everyone, this is your time to play games. So link is in the chat. And then once you hear Valerie resume speaking, you can return. For anyone who just joined, the game links are in the chat.
Okay, so let's talk about the meaning of that game. So when most of us open a classic memory game, we quickly become absorbed in the task of matching the cards. And the images on the cards are inviting, and most people don't think much about the images as they search for the matching pairs. And each of these memory games, however, there is a climate change related punchline. So the images relate to things that we may lose if we don't address the climate crisis. The images depict familiar things that we would lose and would become a memory. When all of the cards are revealed and the 4C button appears, an alternate set of cards is revealed. These cards depict a future state that may become a reality if we remain on our current path towards 4 degrees of global warming. So let's talk about the details of the different decks in the gallery. So let's talk about the Amazon rainforest first. There are 2 of these decks, and the species depicted in this game live in the Amazon, and they would be vulnerable to extinction if portions of the Amazon were to become grassland due to deforestation, fires, and drought. The threshold at which significant portions of the Amazon would become a grassland is referred to as a climate tipping point, and such an event is believed to be irreversible. So in Kimmy's deck, the alternate cards reveal an image of a wild boar for all the cards. And as the rainforest dries out and the habitat changes, there is a dramatic loss in biodiversity. Invasive species, such as the wild boar, can survive in a broader range of habitats than rainforest creatures. So these invaders would consume rainforest plants, transmit diseases to the endemic species, and transform the ecosystem. In Hannah's deck, the alternate cards depict an absence of the species once the rainforest disappears. Similarly, in Tamar's deck, the animals are replaced by a solitary grass plant. Rainforest animals, let's talk about that deck. So worldwide, rainforests and the many species they support are threatened by deforestation and the impacts of climate change. In Blake's deck, endangered creatures from these vulnerable ecosystems are depicted. And in the alternate cards, we see the disappearance of these species. So the original picture is distorted through image manipulation, which is representation of the profound environmental manipulation that may lead to the extinction of these beautiful creatures. Now, coral reefs. The species in this game deck live in the coral reef ecosystem and would become vulnerable to extinction if coral reefs continue to die off due to ocean acidification and warming. Coral reef die-off is a climate-driven tipping point. Limiting global average temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels provides the only chance of survival to the coral reefs globally. And the alternate decks. In Maria's deck, the alternate cards depict the absence of species once the coral reefs disappear, and the chalk outlines suggest an untimely demise. In, I forgot to say this, Rihanna's alternate deck urges us to take action to save our reefs and the many species they support. Coral reefs harbor the highest biodiversity of any ecosystem globally. Okay, moving on to the food crops deck. The food crops depicted in this game will be adversely impacted by climate change. Crop yields will be reduced dramatically in some cases, introducing food security issues and the loss of livelihoods for many communities. And the alternate cards depict the potentially dire implications of food crop loss. Okay, the last one, the world landmarks deck. The iconic world landmarks depicted in this game are vulnerable to destruction by rising sea levels. Scientists warn that many World Heritage sites and iconic monuments could be damaged or destroyed due to extreme storms or flooding. Rising seas and warming oceans pose a grave threat to coastal areas worldwide. And in Yuan's deck, the alternate cards depict iconic landmarks submerged by rising seas. So now I'm going to hand things over to Maya, who will introduce our next game, Tipping Point.
Hey guys, I'm Maya, and I'm going to be introducing this fun game called Tipping Point. So this is a puzzle game with a twist. So you're just gonna have to select the theme of your game and then spin and stop these slot machines to get a random selection of pieces. Drag and drop the pieces to create the image to your right, and if you successfully complete the puzzle, then you win the game. But if any of the tipping points shows up 3 times, then you run out of time.
So one of the puzzle images in this deck was created by Gail Ramos, who's a classmate of these students, and it happens to be probably the hardest puzzle in the deck. It's temperate forest protection, I believe, is the name of it, and its trees very difficult. And one of the fun aspects of this game from a development perspective is that the students could pick their own soundtracks from royalty-free music, so they could stage out the increasingly hectic, stressful music to their own taste.
Okay, so I'm gonna be explaining a little bit about how this game correlates to climate change. So each of the puzzle images depicts a climate change solution. The slot machine symbolizes the uncertainty associated with climate change and the reality that we are basically gambling with our future. By delaying climate actions, we stumble in our pursuits of these solutions. So there are many tipping points in this game, and some that I find really important are melting sea ice and Amazon rainforest. So the melting sea ice. Polar bears and other Arctic species face starvation as their habitat literally melts away. When the global temperature rises, the Arctic feels that temperature increase twice as much, in part because there is less ice to reflect away the heat and because nearby waters are warmer. With less ice reflecting heat off the earth, the climate becomes warmer and even more ice starts to melt, slowing down the ocean circulation that takes the warmer water away from the ice, heating more things up, and so on. And then the Amazon rainforest has been called the lungs of the planet for its important role in removing carbon from the air. And I will go a little bit into what carbon is when we play our next game. But it's important. It's an important part of our weather system too, for its role in holding moisture from rains and preventing it from leaving the broader region too soon, which would cause a drought. The rainforest is home to millions of plants and animal species, countless of which haven't even been identified or discovered yet. And they may hold important discoveries for science and medicine. And deforestation through agriculture activities not only destroys this essential resource, but endangers the remaining forest by weakening the edges to fire and pests, and altering the climate to make naturally occurring fire and deforestation more likely. And then our next game. Oh wait,
I can take it from here.
it's going
Maya.
to Valerie. Sorry.
Okay. So thank you for that great explanation of the game, Maya. I hope you guys enjoyed playing that. So now I'm going to move things over to Allie, who's going to introduce our first speaker, Bernadette Rogers from the Climate Reality Project.
Hi guys, my name is Allie, and we are excited to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Bernadette Rogers. Dr. Bernadette is an adjunct professor of astronomy, physics, and globalization at Portland State University and Portland Community College. She's joining us from the Portland chapter of the Climate Reality Project. Founded by former US Vice President Al Gore, Climate Reality Project educates citizens about climate change and empowers them to take action. In their program, Climate Reality Leadership Corps, they have trained over 31,000 activists and leaders globally since 2006 and have 140 chapters and growing across the US. Now let's turn our attention to Dr. Bernadette.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. As Ali just said, I am going to give you a short presentation that I learned from Climate Reality. Let me make sure I can share my screen. And hopefully you are seeing my first slide, yes?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the climate emergency and humanity's most important decade, which is the decade that we're in. Al Gore calls this the Truth in 10 presentation, but I'll tell you what, it's a lot of slides and I've never seen it done in 10 minutes. So I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to go through a lot of material here. And there's also some of this is from the Al Gore deck and some of it is slides of my own. So again, my name is Bernadette Rogers. I was trained by Al Gore in 2000 and the whole Climate Reality team in 2018, along with about 2,000 other people in Los Angeles. This was back in the day of in-person meetings. And so it was quite a big crowd and a week-long training in Los Angeles. It was a lot of fun. When we went out for our picture, I made sure I got right in front so I could show that I was there, right next to where Al Gore was almost. These trainings are done online now, and they're completely free, and anyone can sign up, and they encourage students, young people, anybody. So I really recommend it if you're interested. So what are we talking about? We're talking about our climate emergency, right? And that is the planet-wide emergency. This is the first picture of the Earth, fully illuminated, taken from space, where you have the whole planet in one frame. And this was from the Apollo missions of the 1960s and 70s. It really changed the way humanity thought about our common home, and it started the modern environmental movement, pictures like this, and started the first Earth Day, which was in 1970, I believe, and tomorrow is Earth Day again, of course. So there's 3 questions in this slide set, and there are really only 3 questions left about the climate crisis. Must we change? Can we change? And will we change? So first of all, must we change? And I think you all already know the answer to that. Oops. Must we change? Can we change? Will we change? Must we change? I think you know the answer. The sky, when we look up at the sky, it seems like it goes on forever, but in fact, the atmosphere above the planet is just a thin shell. In fact, if you could drive a car straight up into the sky, just going at a normal highway speed, you could reach the edge of the atmosphere in less than half an hour. It's not that thick. And so I think most of you all know the basic science of global warming. It's been understood by scientists since the 1800s. Basically, solar radiation hits the Earth, warms up the Earth, and the Earth radiates that energy back into space. But our atmosphere traps some of that energy and keeps our planet warm, which is a good thing. Otherwise, it would be freezing cold all the time here. What's happening now with global warming is that atmosphere, it's a blanket that's gotten thicker. The greenhouse gases cause it to trap more heat, and that makes our planet warmer. Oh, there it is again. So most of the radiation is absorbed by the Earth. Some of it's radiated back into space. And oh, why does it keep playing? Let me see if I can keep going here. The atmosphere traps energy. And then when we thicken up the atmosphere, basically we're not actually making it thicker, but we're adding more greenhouse gases with CO2, it causes that infrared radiation to be trapped. Now let me move on. Come on, sorry. Seems to be a problem here. Okay, I'll do it this way. There we go. So where are those greenhouse gases coming from? Well, everything we do, basically, as you all know. The way that we eat, the way that we travel, the way that we ship our goods all around the world, almost everything we do, the way we heat our homes, the way we make stuff, all of it is, for the most part, creates greenhouse gases. And that is the problem. And so when we measure the amount of carbon that we're putting out there, it's been increasing steadily for the last century and increasing even more in the last few decades. And so what happens? We make that atmosphere trap more heat and the planet warms up. And as I'm sure you all know, our planet has been getting hotter and hotter for the last few decades. In fact, in this graph, we're looking at the change in temperature over the last more than 100 years now, 140 years or so. And that's compared to an average here around the middle of the last century. And we can see it's just going in one direction, hotter and hotter. Another worrying thing is not only is the atmosphere heating the surface, but most of that extra heating is actually going into our oceans. And so half of the extra heat that's gone into the ocean has happened in the last 20 years. And just like the other charts I just showed, things are happening faster and faster, which is worrying. And when the oceans get extra heat, heat is just a form of energy. So the oceans are trapping extra energy, and that adds, it kind of supercharges our weather patterns. Hurricanes have always existed, but now they're getting stronger, they're getting more frequent. We're getting not only huge hurricanes, but flooding that's happening, extreme precipitation events happening all over the world. And all of these are a result of that extra heat being trapped in our atmosphere and a lot of it being absorbed into our oceans. And kind of interestingly, it might seem counterintuitive to have floods and droughts, but it's actually the same process, that same extra heat that's evaporating more water out of the ocean and causing our big downpours and hurricanes and floods. It's also pulling moisture even more quickly out of the soil, causing longer and deeper droughts. And so we're having drought conditions here in Oregon, in California, around a lot of the world is suffering from extreme drought. And along with drought comes fire. And the fire danger is increasing all over the western part of the United States. California's had terrible fires, Canada as well. And of course, here in Oregon, just last year, we had terrible fires. And the fire season is starting already again. So drought, fire, hurricanes, all of these are extreme weather events that are getting worse and worse as a result of climate change. And that's not all. I could talk about glaciers melting. I could talk about sea level rise. We could talk about ocean acidification, climate refugees, species extinction, like a few of the previous speakers have already mentioned, ecosystem loss. There's just a tremendous amount of damage being done to our planet. So that's the bad news. And I know you all are familiar with it, and it can be challenging to consider all of these things happening at once. So the answer to the first question, must we change? Yes, absolutely, we must change. And we know that already. So the more important questions and the better news part of this presentation is, can we change? Well, the answer to that also is yes. We have the solutions at hand. Renewable energy is what we need, along with lots of other changes like different ways of growing our food, renewable agriculture. And it's happening already. It's not happening fast enough yet, but it is happening. Global wind energy has increased astronomically in the last couple of decades. Those charts I showed you before of things getting worse and worse, we can say the same thing about renewable energy. It's going up. Again, not as fast as it needs to, but faster and faster all the time, which is a good thing. And we get all the energy we need from the sun and from our planet. We don't need to use fossil fuels. Wind energy by itself around the world could supply all the electricity that we need 40 times over if we had enough of it. We don't have enough wind turbines yet, but as we build new wind turbines, we have, there's more than enough wind energy out there. Similarly, solar energy. Solar is an amazing solution to our problems. There's enough solar energy reaching the Earth every hour to fill all the world's energy needs for a whole year. People find that unbelievable, but I'm a science teacher, and I have my students do this exercise, and I can assure you that it is true. We're not harvesting that energy yet, and it's challenging the technology to convert it all into the different types of energy that we need. But there's plenty of energy there from the sun. And just like wind energy installations, world solar power is increasing incredibly fast. In fact, we've blown away the predictions for how much solar energy we would have at this point. And the reason for that is because it keeps getting cheaper and cheaper. So when I was a kid and my dad looked at solar energy way back here, it was crazy expensive. You couldn't really consider it unless you were super wealthy. But now solar energy is cheaper than other types of electricity at this point. So it's just becoming more and more common. And the nice thing about the price going down is that more and more people have access to it. And in fact, solar power is replacing other forms of electricity, and it's also going into parts of the world that don't have electricity currently, where they can install a simple solar panel and just get enough electricity to run a refrigerator or run charge your stuff or run a computer. So a lot of, we're seeing in developing countries that places that don't have electricity are just skipping right over the old technologies and going straight to solar. Electric vehicles is another way that we need to go. We can electrify we can use renewable energy on our electricity grid and get our electric in our house coming from renewable. But until we have electric vehicles, we're still stuck with gasoline, which is fossil fuel based. So as we move towards renewable energy and electricity, we want to have electric vehicles that are also using that renewable energy. And countries around the world are committed to going to all electric vehicles, and more companies now are making electric vehicles. In fact, Volkswagen announced that they're going to stop making gas vehicles. They're just going to go to all electric. So businesses are getting on board with the changes that we need. Again, it's not happening fast enough, but it is happening. Global, so many companies around the world have committed to changing to 100% renewable energy. And it's happening more and more all the time. So can we change? Yes, absolutely. And the last question is, will we change? And this is the important one. And how will we change? And will we change fast enough? And the answer to that is that it is up to us. It's not going to be the politicians or the scientists that will solve this crisis. It has to be the people pushing for it to happen. It's going to take all of us. And the good news, honestly, is that we know what we need to do, and we know we can do it. We have the technology. We understand the problem. We've been studying climate change for decades now. The International Panel on Climate Change has been putting out report after report. And these reports, unfortunately, because we haven't been acting fast enough, we've been studying it for decades. We need to now stop studying it or stop only studying it and spend more of our energy acting and fixing the problems. So I won't go into these graphs, but basically it shows that we know exactly how much carbon we're putting out there now, and we know how much we need to get it down to in order to stop the temperature increase at 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is what the Paris Agreement decided was where we want to stop it. We've already increased by 1 degree Celsius, but we can still stop it at 1.5. and we just need to figure out how to do it. So this is the goal. We need to cut our carbon emissions in half by 2030. That's not even 10 years from now. And we need to reach net zero emissions by 2050. That means by 2050, we're down here in this part of the graph where we basically are not adding any more carbon to the atmosphere. All the carbon we put out there is being taken in by the nature and plants and other processes. And I'm almost finished. I just want to show a couple of more slides. The good news, again, we know what we need to do. The US has rejoined the International Paris Agreement. And in fact, tomorrow, the United States government, the Biden-Harris administration, is hosting a leaders summit on climate. It's available online. It's going to be streamed and you can watch it. It's an online meeting. And they will be announcing tomorrow new US commitments to help limit warming to 1.5 degrees. The Biden administration has committed, well, we'll find out more tomorrow, but they're saying that they'll commit to carbon pollution-free power by 2035. That's just a little bit past that 2030 deadline, and getting us towards net zero by 2050. But the last couple things I want to say, and I know I'm about out of time, is that it matters how we do this. So we're all in the same storm. We all will feel the effects of climate change, but we're not all in the same boat. The gravest effects of the environment are suffered by the poorest, and that's well known. And that's a topic that's called environmental justice or climate justice. It's the principle that that oppressive toxins and all the pollution and everything that goes along with our carbon economy, as well as the impacts of climate change, are suffered worse by marginalized people. That's communities of color, poor communities, and not only here in the US, but around the world. So climate justice pushes for community-led solutions, addressing the root causes of climate disruption, which include economic inequity and unfair treatment of people around the world. And again, it's going to be up to us, and I encourage you all to get involved however you can. Organizing is the antidote to despair. I've learned that as a climate organizer myself. And if you want to join the fight, there are so many ways to do it. There are youth groups suing the government. There are youth groups storming the government buildings of power. The Sunrise Movement, there's a huge Sunrise Movement right here in Portland. And children and youth are getting involved all over the world, all over the United States and all over the world. And art is an essential part of that. Again, we have to convince people that this is what needs to happen. So it's talking to politicians is important and doing the science is important, but really art is what moves people. And so this happened just last week in San Francisco, and folks painted a huge mural right on the ground in front of Wells Fargo to tell Wells Fargo to stop funding fossil fuel projects. We know kids want climate justice, and kids deserve climate justice. And so I encourage you to join those who are using their voices, their votes, their choices to fight the climate crisis like your world depends on it, because your world depends on it. And I'll just finish with a recommendation for 2 books. This is a recent book written by the folks that did the Paris Agreement, that led the International Paris Agreement. It's not a very long book, and it's a really good one that talks about how we need to get where we need to go, and how it's up to us, the future we choose. And then I should mention as well Al Gore's book, Truth to Power, and An Inconvenient Sequel, which is a film. And that's the end of my presentation. I haven't been able to see the chat while I was talking. So if there's any time, I'm happy to answer questions if I can.
Okay, if anyone has any questions, you can put those in the chat and I'll be monitoring those, but let me give people a couple minutes for those to roll in.
And I know that went really fast, but I encourage you all to just explore more and learn more about it. And
Yeah. And we have it recorded, so if you want to go back and look through things and look at the resources that Bernadette shared, you totally can. But right now it doesn't look like we have any questions. So thank you so much,
Valerie, for inviting me, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you so much for coming. Okay, who's next? Next, I'm going to hand things over to Maya to introduce our next game, Carbon Crush.
Okay, so our next game is called Carbon Crush, and this is a matching game inspired by Candy Crush, which is really fun. But instead of candies, this game features greenhouse gases, molecules. So, like in Candy Crush, you just move a molecule one spot vertically or horizontally in order to create matching sets of 3, 4, or 5 in a row.
So you guys can go ahead and play the game now. The game link is in the chat. So yeah, you guys have some time to explore and see how fun the game is. It's definitely one of my favorites.
And this game has no sound at the moment, so it has the potential to transform your Zoom experiences. But not during class.
Okay, so this game introduces the major greenhouse gases and highlights the differences in global warming potential of those gases. So greenhouse gases come from a broad range of sources and can have varying effects on the Earth's warming. Two key ways in which these gases differ from each other are their ability to absorb energy and how long they stay in the atmosphere. The larger the global warming potential of a gas, the more that gas warms the Earth compared to CO2, which is known as carbon dioxide, over a specified time period. The scoring the Carbon Crush game is based on the warming potential of each molecule, with higher points being awarded for the removal of gases that have a higher warming potential. Many players will not notice the scoring nuance, much like most of us do not pay attention to the different types of greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere. However, it is really, really, really important to recognize the major impact greenhouse gases have on the Earth's warming. And I think we're going to go into the next game. So the next game we're going to be playing is called Snowman. And this is a classic game that most people first encounter as Hangman. You can start the game by choosing a snowman design and selecting a difficulty level, easy, medium, or difficult. The more difficult the level, the less incorrect letters you will get. And then you just have to figure out the word. So yeah.
The link for that game is in the chat now, and if you can't play it, you can watch our Zoom tech Ian play the game. He's playing with my snowman right now. I made that one.
Valerie, why don't you share some of the inspiration behind your design?
Okay, so if you go to the Snowman Gallery, you might notice that my snowman is named Snowdero because he is based off of the iconic children's movie character Totoro. So yeah, hopefully you guys see the similarities in the big round belly and the arms. But yeah, it's based off of Totoro from My Neighbor Totoro, the Studio Ghibli movie. It looks just like him, I think.
I think it came out great.
All right, so the classic Hangman game is about saving someone who has been condemned to die. The Snowman game conveys a similar message about the climate crisis. With each incorrect guess, the snowman melts away piece by piece, but all is not lost if you ultimately solve the puzzle. So the idea is that by educating others as well as ourselves about climate change, and working to solve climate challenges, we can stabilize the climate and control our future.
Okay. I hope you guys enjoyed playing that game. So now I'm gonna move on to introducing Ali, who is going to talk about Citizens Climate Lobby. We have a quick presentation about the organization from Sachi Sharma, and then we will watch a quick video. So I'm gonna hand things over to Ali.
Thanks, Valerie. Our next panelist, Sachi Sharma, is part of a youth action team for the state of Washington of Citizens Climate Lobby. Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that focuses on national policies to address climate change. They aim to get individuals to advocate in their communities and reach their representatives to co-sign bills and eventually pass them through Congress. Their climate solution is to put a price on carbon and become net zero by 2050. This would provide affordable, clean energy, especially for more vulnerable communities. I will let Sachi take it from here.
Thank you so much, Ali. So I'm going to screen share a really quick presentation before we move on to a great video by another member of Citizens Climate Lobby. So just a quick agenda. I'll talk about what CCL is, who I am, and then we'll go on to the carbon fee and environmental justice part. So Citizens Climate Lobby, also known as CCL, is a national organization promoting a bipartisan solution to climate change, and we actually have over 600 chapters. And if you guys want more info on that, you can just search up Citizens Climate Lobby and our website should come up. More about what I do in relation to the Citizens Climate Lobby. I am on the CCL Youth Outreach team, and our goal is basically to reach youth who want to make a difference by lobbying and really make an impact on legislation. So I lead social media for that, which I have written up here on the slides, and that should be going in chat as well. So yeah, we've been a group for about over a year now, and we have accumulated a couple thousand followers and over 50 team members now. So things are going pretty well, and we're actually getting ready for a pretty hefty lobbying season right now. We're based out of Washington, and we're a group of passionate teenagers. Now we're going to talk about carbon fee and environmental justice through a video by Jonathan Marshall. So I think somebody else is going to show
that. Thank you, Sashi. That was really wonderful. So like Sashi, I'm a member of Citizens Climate Lobby, and Sashi is a great testament to the youth energy that the organization fosters. So I encourage you to check things out on Citizens Climate Lobby when we get to the playlists that Valerie will be leading us through. A carbon fee and dividend policy is a great foundational policy to get to net zero by 2050. The essence of it is very simple, really. We all respond to price signals, sometimes more so than to any other types of signals. It's almost when you put a price on carbon and increase the price of fossil fuels and all the products and services that depend on fossil fuels for their production, you are changing the price signals that people get every day. It's as if you had a cell phone in your pocket and you got a notification every time you bought something about the price differential between using clean energy or dirty energy. When we're at a grocery store and we see a product, we see two products and we're indifferent between them, we'll typically just buy the one that's less expensive. So price signals are a really efficient way of driving fossil fuels out of the economy. And it's not the only policy that we need, but it is a foundational one to accomplish the goals on the timeline that we have. What's also great about a carbon fee and dividend policy is that it has a steadily rising price on pollution. And so people see it coming, the writing's on the wall, and that's a good thing because businesses can then start deploying their investment dollars towards renewable alternatives to fossil fuels and to clean technologies. And that's really harnessing humanity's superpower, which is innovation. And you'll often hear folks like Bill Gates talk about the important role that innovation will play in this dramatic clean energy transformation that we all need to undergo. The final piece of the puzzle with carbon fee and dividend is that in addition to accomplishing the dramatic reductions necessary on the timeline that we need in a cost-effective way, it's also a very powerful tool for accomplishing that in an economically just way and an environmentally just way. So Jonathan Marshall is a member of my CCL chapter, used to be the economics columnist of the San Francisco Chronicle. And so the next video we're featuring is a talk that he gave recently about the role of carbon fee and dividend policy in promoting both economic justice and environmental justice.
As political winds of change blow across this country. And I think an understanding of this will really help us promote carbon fee and dividend among particularly democratic and more progressive audiences. Last summer, Joe Biden introduced his $2 trillion climate plan, calling it a plan to secure environmental justice and equitable opportunity in a clean energy future. That was a really interesting way of titling his climate plan. And consistent with that theme, as president, he's vowed to make climate action and social justice the centerpieces of his policy agenda. This presentation examines just what we mean by economic and environmental justice, and how a carbon fee and dividend policy can be a uniquely powerful force for delivering them. This proven climate policy, as most of you know, applies a rising tax on fossil fuels to discourage their use while returning the income to all Americans in the form of an equal dividend. Last year, more than 80 members of Congress co-sponsored the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which embodied those principles. And finally, I'll look briefly at how alternative regulatory policies compare in terms of effectiveness and justice. Many discussions conflate two related but distinct concepts: economic justice and environmental justice. Economic justice means reducing income and wealth gaps to create more opportunities for disadvantaged groups. It also means making sure we don't impose the costs of a climate solution on lower income individuals and households. That's critical. Environmental justice means ending the unfair concentration of air and water pollution in poor and minority communities, and implementing effective climate policies to mitigate the harm to disadvantaged communities. Well, let's start by taking a closer look at economic justice. The growth of income inequality in the United States is virtually without parallel in the developed world. Today, the top 10th of Americans earn nearly half of all income each year. And as a share of both income and wealth, the middle class is losing ground. You can see those downward sloping lines for the middle class. And the lower income fifth of Americans is basically they're just economic outcasts in this country. The gap between haves and have-nots is particularly glaring in terms of race. As you can see here, white Americans have enjoyed extraordinary growth of wealth in the last 30 years, whereas Black Americans have barely edged out any gains. Thanks to historical legacies and continuing discrimination, African Americans only barely hang on to the American dream. The result of all this isn't just inequality, but grinding poverty, closely linked to race and ethnic background. As you can see from this chart, more than 3 times as many African Americans live in poverty compared to white Americans. A 2018 United Nations report noted that America's, quote, immense wealth and expertise stand in shocking contrast with the conditions in which vast numbers of its citizens live. About 40 million live in poverty, 18.5 million in extreme poverty, and 5.3 million live in third world conditions of absolute poverty. That's an incredible indictment. Well, all of these economic inequalities are matters of life and death. Deaths from such factors rival those from major diseases, as you can see from this 2011 study. Now let's turn to the other kind of EJ, environmental justice. Just as income and wealth are unequally distributed, so are air and water pollution. This chart shows that deadly fine particulates affect communities of color much more than white communities. Like 40% higher concentrations in Latino and other communities of color than average, and whites shown on the far right are about 20% lower in their the concentrations that they face. And EPA reports that low income and poor Americans face 40% higher concentrations than average. This pollution isn't merely unpleasant, it kills, and it costs society a fortune. And much of this pollution comes from the burning of fossil fuels in vehicles, power plants, and industry. Those same fossil fuels, of course, disrupt the climate with their emissions of greenhouse gases. Since the 1980s, world temperatures have grown a bit over 1 degree centigrade and are moving forward fast. Meanwhile, the number and cost of major climate disasters are soaring at a staggering rate, as you can see from the chart at right. Those costs fall hardest on disadvantaged communities, which can't afford insurance or adaptive measures to protect their homes and lives. And this was called out in a major national climate assessment report in 2018. Well, of course, there is a solution: carbon fee and dividend, which I'll talk about now. First, quick primer on how it works. The policy would impose an excise tax on fossil fuels to discourage consumption of dirty energy and encourage the use of cleaner technologies. Revenues generated from this tax would be returned in equal shares to every American, giving them the resources to make the transition to a low carbon world. Led by Janet Yellen, now serving as Secretary of Treasury, nearly 3,600 economists, including 27 Nobel laureates, signed a statement declaring that a steadily rising tax on fossil fuels is, quote, the most cost-effective lever to reduce carbon emissions at the scale and speed that is necessary, unquote. That's an unprecedented consensus. And at the same time, they supported returning the revenues in the form of an equal dividend. So the economists are right, carbon fees work. That's critical to the cause of environmental justice. These fees would cover nearly all sectors of the economy, giving consumers and producers a powerful incentive to lower their carbon footprints as efficiently as possible. Economists at Columbia University project that a rising carbon fee would virtually eliminate net CO2 emissions by 2050, as shown by the green dots going down to the right on this graph. We also have real-world experience to support these projections. Since 1990, when Sweden imposed a carbon tax, the country's GDP has grown 80% while slashing CO2 emissions by 25%, as shown by the blue line on the bottom. The one on top is the US. The actual gap in CO2 emissions is much greater than shown by this graph because it starts with the two indexed at 100 in 1990. In fact, today, Sweden emits only a quarter as much CO2 per dollar of GDP as the US. So that's much of that is due to the carbon tax. Besides slowing the destructive effects of climate change, use of carbon fees to curb the burning of fossil fuels would also save hundreds of thousands of lives over time by reducing harmful air pollution. Many of these health benefits, as we have seen, would accrue to disadvantaged communities. That would be another huge victory for environmental justice. Now let's look at the dividend side. A dividend check of a few $100s each month means a lot more to a poor household than to a rich one. As you can see from these findings of a 2017 Treasury Department study, the dividend from a $50 carbon tax would have a significant impact on poor families, raising their income on the, you can see the bar on the far left, nearly 9%. And it would help even the middle class. These figures are net of costs. In other words, they account for the fact that a carbon tax would raise the cost of electricity and gasoline and home heating with fossil fuels. The good news is that while the fee encourages people to use cleaner energy, the dividend turns the difficult transition away from fossil fuels into a net economic benefit for most Americans. In other words, while the carbon fee delivers environmental justice, the dividend delivers economic justice. Here's another way to slice the numbers. As you can see here, the dark green shows households that would benefit financially. Poor and minority families are particularly well protected by the dividend. So it's a great means of promoting economic justice. Well, skeptics of carbon fees advocate a host of industry-specific regulatory and subsidy policies to achieve the same results. In that spirit, the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis issued a 535-page report last year, advocating hundreds of new programs while paying lip service to carbon pricing. This pretty chart shows some of the claimed reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Remember, though, that every one of these colorful sectors would require thousands of pages of new regulations and years of court challenges to implement. Furthermore, and rather amazingly, the report offered no analysis of the costs or the distribution of impacts. That's remarkable given the attention that Democrats and progressives have been paying to economic justice. And if you take nothing away from this presentation, it should be that any comprehensive plan to address the climate should be transparent about its economic impacts. The fact is, most regulations and standards are very costly compared to market-based incentives like fossil fuel taxes. Let's take one familiar example, fuel efficiency standards for new vehicles. Researchers from MIT reported in 2013, consistent with other studies, that tougher fuel efficiency standards for new vehicles would cost the economy for the same reduction in gasoline use anywhere from 6 to 14 times more than a carbon tax of about $45 a ton. That's because a gas tax or carbon tax provides immediate direct incentive for drivers to reduce gasoline use by driving fewer miles or taking transit, while efficiency standards can only squeeze reductions out of new vehicles. Also, unlike fuel standards, a carbon fee gives people an incentive to buy more efficient new or used vehicles rather than holding on to their gas-guzzling SUVs longer. So without great care and attention, the cost of these regulations can fall on those least able to afford them. Studies show, for example, that fuel standards are not only more expensive, but more regressive than a carbon fee and dividend. That is, they fall harder on lower income households by raising the cost of new cars and inevitably of used cars. Unlike carbon fees, moreover, regulations don't provide any revenue to make families whole. California, a leader in regulation, has a slew of programs that purport to help mitigate the cost to disadvantaged communities. But a recent study by the Legislative Analyst's Office shows little evidence that those communities are actually benefiting. Well, I say we can and must do better. I hope today's presentation has given you insights into how carbon fee and dividend policies can deliver a future of economic and environmental justice, as well as climate security. I hope you'll join the Citizen Climate Lobby in making that happen. And as time permits, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you for sharing that video with us, Ian. Now I'm going to talk about the snake game. So Ian will drop a link to that in the chat. This is a classic video game for those of us who are older on this call, you may recognize this from the early days of video games, but it's still a fun classic. And basically the way you play is you use the arrow keys on your keyboard to navigate the snake around the game grid. And then you are trying to avoid running into the walls, the ceiling, or yourself. And while Ian plays, I will jump in a moment with some commentary about the game. And you'll notice that on our development list is the addition of a start button so that it doesn't automatically send you off to the races. So the question most people ask when I share this game is, what does this have to do with climate change? Well, in this game, it's actually a really powerful metaphor for our relationship with fossil fuels. So in the game, the fossil fuels are represented by red apples. And I like that because it's basically a reference to the forbidden fruit, a biblical reference. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the world economy was developing pretty rapidly through the use of fossil fuel energy. And this was a choice, a worldwide choice that I like to view as our original sin, which set in motion the rampant release of greenhouse gases that has produced the circumstances we're in today. But in the game, as in life, we operate within the limits of a constrained system. So as the player consumes red apples, the snake gets longer and it becomes more difficult to safely navigate the game environment. As we consume more and more fossil fuels, we test the limits of our biosphere and it becomes more and more difficult to achieve sustainable growth. And that's the main metaphor. You'll notice on the top, the game measures both score and greenhouse gas concentration. So the game actually starts at a concentration of 278 ppm, which stands for parts per million, which is a measure of carbon dioxide equivalent in the atmosphere. And 278 was the level of CO2 in the atmosphere at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. As the snake consumes more apples, the concentration increases. And at higher levels of concentration, you begin to see these hazards on the game grid. And those hazards include things like drought, fire, and floods, which correspond to what we're seeing today at a parts per million of about 415 in the atmosphere. But as you begin to play the game, after you consume 5 apples, green apples begin to appear in the game grid. And green apples represent renewable energy. And unlike red apples, they do not increase the length of the snake, and they reduce concentration by a small amount. And this aspect of the game represents the sustainability of renewable energy sources. You also see apple pies begin to appear, and some of them are red and some of them are green. The red apple pies represent goods and services that are produced using fossil fuels as energy, while the green apple pies are goods and services that are produced with renewable energy. So the consumption of the red apple pies increases the length of the snake, while the consumption of green apple pies does not. And one of the interesting things about the game is that once players realize that red apples and red apple pies will increase the length of the snake, they may